In the early 1970s, Chile was one of the most stable democracies in Latin America. Elections were competitive, political parties were active, and power had historically changed hands through the ballot box rather than through military coups. But in 1970, the election of a socialist president alarmed powerful actors both inside and outside the country. Behind closed doors in Washington, a covert campaign began to take shape, an intelligence operation that would attempt to influence Chile's political future. It was known as Operation FUBELT. The story begins with the presidential election of September 1970. Chilean voters elected Salvador Allende, a Marxist politician who led a coalition called Popular Unity. Allende's victory was narrow but legitimate under Chile's electoral system. For many Chileans, his election represented hope for social reform, nationalization of key industries, land redistribution, and expanded welfare programs. But for the United States government, the result raised serious concerns. At the height of the Cold War, Washington feared the spread of socialist governments in the Western Hemisphere. Only a decade earlier, Cuban Revolution had brought Fidel Castro to power, creating a communist-aligned state just 90 miles from the United States. American officials worried that Chile might become another foothold for Soviet influence in Latin America. Within weeks of Allende's electoral victory, the administration of Richard Nixon began discussing ways to prevent him from taking office. Internal conversations revealed deep anxiety about what a successful socialist government in Chile might mean for the region. Nixon reportedly instructed intelligence officials to make the Chilean economy scream, signaling a willingness to apply economic and political pressure to destabilize the new government. Responsibility for covert planning fell largely to the Central Intelligence Agency. The operation that followed, later revealed in declassified documents, was given the coding name Operation FUBELT. The plan unfolded along two parallel tracks. The first approach, often referred to as Track I, involved political pressure and diplomatic maneuvering. The goal was to prevent Allende from being confirmed as president by the Chilean Congress, which had the constitutional authority to finalize the election results. U.S. officials quietly encouraged Chilean politicians to support an alternative candidate instead. But the second approach, known as Track II, was far more controversial. Under Track II, the CIA explored ways to encourage a military coup inside Chile. The idea was not simply to influence political debate, but to remove Allende from power entirely before he could assume office. According to later investigations, the agency made contact with Chilean military officers who were hostile to the incoming government. One figure became central to these discussions: René Schneider, the commander-in-chief of the Chilean army. Schneider was known for a doctrine that insisted the military remain neutral in politics and respect Chile's constitution. His position made him an obstacle to any coup attempt. Some conspirators believed that removing Schneider would open the door for military intervention. In October 1970, a group of officers attempted to kidnap Schneider. The plan went disastrously wrong. During the attempt, Schneider was shot and later died from his wounds. The killing shocked Chilean society and provoked widespread outrage. Instead of destabilizing the political situation in the way conspirators hoped, the incident strengthened public support for constitutional order. Shortly afterward, Chilean Congress confirmed Allende as president, and he officially took office in November 1970. But Operation FUBELT did not end there. Over the next 3 years, Chile entered a period of intense political conflict. Allende's government pursued sweeping reforms, including the nationalization of major industries such as copper, which had long been dominated by foreign corporations. Supporters argued that these policies would reduce inequality and strengthen Chile's economic independence. Critics, both domestic and international, warned that they would destabilize the economy. During this period, the CIA continued to fund opposition media outlets, political groups, and labor organizations inside Chile. The intention was to weaken support for Allende and amplify criticism of his government. At the same time, Chile faced economic difficulties, including inflation, shortages, and political strikes that paralyzed key sectors. The country gradually became polarized. Supporters of the government organized mass demonstrations defending the reforms, while opponents accused Allende of pushing Chile toward authoritarian socialism. Violence between rival groups increased. The political system struggled to contain the escalating conflict. By 1973, the situation had reached a breaking point. On September 11th of that year, the Chilean military launched a coup against the government. Fighter jets bombed the presidential palace as troops surrounded the building. Inside, Salvador Allende delivered a final radio address before dying during the assault. Power was seized by the armed forces under the leadership of Augusto Pinochet. The new regime quickly dismantled Chile's democratic institutions. Political parties were banned, opponents were arrested, and thousands of people were detained in stadiums and military facilities. Human rights organizations later documented widespread torture, disappearances, and executions during the early years of military rule. Although the exact role of Operation FUBELT in the coup has been debated for decades, declassified records confirm that the United States had been deeply involved in efforts to undermine Allende's government before 1973. Critics argue that the covert campaign helped create the conditions that made the coup possible. For supporters of the intervention at the time, the operation was justified by Cold War logic. They believed preventing a socialist government aligned with the Soviet Union was a strategic necessity. But for many Chileans and historians today, Operation FUBELT represents a stark example of foreign interference in a democratic process. The consequences of the coup were long-lasting. Augusto Pinochet ruled Chile as a military dictator for nearly 17 years. While his government implemented major economic reforms, it also left a legacy of human rights abuses that continues to shape Chilean politics and memory. In the United States, revelations about Operation FUBELT eventually became part of a broader national reckoning over intelligence activities. Investigations such as the United States Senate Church Committee in the 1970s exposed numerous covert operations conducted around the world, raising questions about oversight, legality, and the limits of secret power. Operation FUBELT remains one of the most controversial intelligence operations of the Cold War. It highlights how geopolitical fears, ideological conflict, and covert strategy can intersect with the internal politics of another nation. It also raises enduring questions about sovereignty and accountability. When powerful states attempt to shape the political destiny of smaller countries, the consequences often extend far beyond the immediate goals of the operation. For Chile, the events surrounding Operation FUBELT marked a turning point, transforming a democratic system into years of military rule. And decades later, the shadows of that intervention still linger in debates about foreign influence, intelligence power, and the fragile nature of democracy itself.